I've already done a lot of talking about how all the best decks in the 2004 format are weak to grass. Well, where is the big grass deck to counter all of those? We've talked about Ninjask, and yeah, Ninjask can ping and hit for weakness, but it's not a big grass deck. That's why today we're talking about Sceptile EX. It is certainly big and grass, and also notably weak to grass. 150 HP is quite a lot, considering that for 1 grass energy you can also heal, not just yourself but all of your Pokemon that have grass energy attached to them. Your real bread and butter is going to be Poison Ring. For 3 energy you're dealing 40 damage, and the defending Pokemon is now poisoned. Then on your opponent's turn that Pokemon cannot retreat, so more often than not you're going to get a bonus 20 damage off of poison. So 60 damage for 3 energy isn't bad, also considering that you can just use Poison Ring over and over and over again, and that's going to stop them from retreating over and over and over again. Slash and Strike is going to deal 100 damage. That's a lot of energy you need for it. Like, you must really need to slap something hard in order to spend 5 energy on Slash and Strike, but this deck can facilitate that. Your backup in the deck is going to be Muk EX. Primarily for this toxic gassed Pokebody, it's Muk doing Muk things. It shuts down all of your opponent's Pokepowers and Pokebodies. We're talking Blaziken, Delcatty, Lantern, Aquamanectric, Shedinja, Gardevoir, Camerupt, Claydol. A lot of staple Pokemon in this format rely on powers and bodies. When you shut down these abilities that streamline those decks start to struggle. Those decks are plentiful, but they don't make up the entire metagame, so when you're up against decks that don't rely on powers, you're generally not even going to play it unless you're up against a fire or grass deck that can easily knock out a Sceptile. You'll just swap in the Muk EX, which is weak to Psychic instead. And that's really all there is to this deck. Because of all of the grass weakness in the 2004 format, this deck doesn't need to do anything else. It can shut down powers and bodies, and then it can hit hard for big grass damage. Very simple and easy to play. Likewise, the Pokemon lineup is just as simple. We're using 4 copies of the Trico. This is actually the Black Star promo Trico. I like it just because it has that sporadic sponging attack that can deal 10 damage and have a chance to heal. It's just way better than just pounding. It doesn't make sense that they're both on the same card, really. On top of that, we have 3 copies of Grovyle. This is the one with Natural Cure, so when you attach a grass energy from your hand to Grovyle, you can remove all special conditions. Another form of healing in case you do get stuck as a Grovyle and you're not able to evolve. And then from there, we'll have 2 copies of the Energy Trans Sceptile, the one that can move grass energies around. And you may be thinking, that seems a little counterproductive, having a Pokepower in a deck that is meant to shut down Pokepowers and Pokebodies. Well, these are more for elongated matchups. Like if you come up against a Medicham or a Shiftry or a Gorbis deck that isn't relying on any powers or bodies, that game's going to get a little more drawn out. That's where you want to evolve up into these Sceptiles and kind of flood your field with grass energy. That way you're able to move them around, you're able to get off different attacks, you're able to get a grass energy on all of your Pokemon so that you can have a Sceptile EX just heal everything on the field at once for only 1 grass energy. So this is more of your alt for the deck when your main attacker is actually going to be the Sceptile EX that we've already talked about. High HP, can hit for big damage if you really want to. Mostly you're going to be trapping your opponent in the active position and just letting them slowly die of poison while you're pinging them for damage every turn. It really is just one big solid grass attacker that you're going to use to try to hit your opponent as many times and as hard as you can for weakness. And then of course we have the 3 Grimer in here that are going to be evolving up into the Muk EX. Like I said in the intro, Muk EX is not going to come out every game. There are going to be games you're not even searching it out. You can discard it without having to think twice. It only serves a couple of purposes in the deck, so if you don't need it for any of those, then you can kind of just forget about it. And then we have the 4 copies of Dunsparce in here for its amazing strike and run attack. This is going to help you get your early setups. Dunsparce is always going to be your ideal starting Pokemon just because it allows you to go grab all the Pokemon you need for your setup and then just run with them. So you can use Strike and Run, go get a couple of Tricos, a Grimer if you think you're going to need one for the matchup, and then from there it's just searching out all those evolution cards and buddy, you are set. Now on to the trainer base. At the top of the list we got 4 copies of TV Reporter cause it's real good draw power. Below that, 3 copies of Professor Oak's Research because it is also real good draw power. Below that, some Professor Elm's training method, just because it is really important to get those evolution cards into play. Since there are only 3 Grovyle in the deck, you almost always have to search them out with Professor Elm's training method or draw into them with the aforementioned good draw power up here. You'll see notably from this list too, there is not a single rare candy in this deck. So we are actually running a 4-3-4 Sceptile line without rare candy. And that seems insane, but with Sceptile, you're either going to go with one or the other, or just have one of both in play for those matchups where you're not playing against power or body decks. So it's not truly a 4-3-4 line, just because you don't ideally want to have 2 Energy Trans Sceptile and a Sceptile EX. Generally, you only need like 1 Sceptile EX as your main attacker with the Energy Trans as support. If that build does make you a little uncomfortable with consistency, you can always opt for a couple of rare candy in here as well. So on to Desert Shaman, a card that you don't see a ton. It's another pretty decent way to get cards in your hand, especially if you are in a matchup where you don't need the Grimers or the Muks and you have them in hand. You might as well shuffle them on in and try to get 4 better cards. That is one of the main issues with this deck. If you don't need the Muk, that's 6 dead cards in your deck that you're going to have to draw around as much as possible. Oracle's going to be the other method that helps you deal with that issue. Oracle lets you choose 2 cards from your deck, shuffle your deck, and then put those 2 cards on top in any order. That's going to make sure that the next 2 cards you draw are going to be the cards that you need and not another Grimer or Muk. Spreading around grass energy is pretty important in this deck, and so you don't want to lose any of those unnecessarily to having to retreat Pokemon, which is why there's 2 copies of Switch and 2 copies of Warp Point in this deck. Muk and Sceptile both have decently high retreat costs. You don't want to be tossing 2 energy off of them just to get them onto the bench and out of a sticky situation when you have utility trainers that you can use. Just depending on how your matchups go in your own playstyle, you can use these proportionately and whatever you prefer. Warp Point, I know, isn't always going to be ideal, especially if you want to keep your opponent's active Pokemon trapped, which is one of the main strategies of a Sceptile EX. And then, of course, any deck that is utilizing Energy Trans is also going to utilize Pokemon Nurse or Pokemon Sitter, whatever the equivalent is for that format. You can move the energy off, heal them completely without consequence, and then move those energy back when you need to attack. And then rounding out the trainer base is 2 copies of Low Pressure System. This is just going to be your key stadium for the deck. It allows all of your grass Pokemon an additional 10 HP, which is just going to be helpful across matchups. More HP is never going to be a bad thing. And then over to your energy base, we're looking at 3 copies of Boost Energy. This is what I mentioned earlier as being the means into getting off a 200 damage attack off of Sceptile EX with its Slashing Strike. If you're in a situation where you just need to deal 100 damage, or if you're hitting for weakness, 200 damage, which if you're up against something like a Kyogre or a Wailord, that is what you want to do, then you do your best to get a Boost Energy in your hand, you drop it on that Sceptile EX, and then out of nowhere, you're dealing huge damage that your opponent did not expect. You take a prize, you put your opponent on the back foot, and then you put on the pressure with this huge grass-type Pokemon. Rounding out the rest of the deck is just going to be 15 basic grass energy. Pretty self-explanatory what a grass energy does in a grass deck, so I guess we'll end there. Rare Candy is an extremely valid addition to this deck, especially if you're wanting to go more aggro with the Sceptile. You can benefit pretty heavily early game going straight from Trico into Sceptile. Just remember that ATM Rock is everywhere in this format, and that can be devastating to get hit with a Stone Generator knocking you back down into a 40 HP Trico. Town Volunteers is another solid consistency choice for recycling those key Pokemon that you need in this deck, especially in those matchups where you aren't using the Muk, so really your only Pokemon in the deck are just Dunsparce and the Sceptile line. Losing a Trico, Grovyle, Sceptile all at once is pretty devastating for the rest of your game, especially if it does get drawn out like a lot of these matches will. 1 to 2 copies of Town Volunteers could be crucial. When it comes to within deck strategy, you don't have to think too hard about most of your moves other than do the Energy Trans before you play the Muk. You will need to do some battle math every now and then to choose if it's more correct on your turn to heal all of your Pokemon for 40 damage, or go ahead and try to get a knockout with Poison Ring. A quick comparison of your side of the field versus your opponent's solves this pretty quickly. If your opponent is quickly ramping up to start KOing your Pokemon, then yeah, you probably want to go ahead and start getting some KOs on them to initiate that trading. But if they're still getting some setup done, or if the opposing Pokemon's going to get knocked out by poison damage between turns, then yes, absolutely capitalize on that healing. The deck does have fairly good matchups across the board due to its ability to hit for grass weakness, but it does struggle against decks where it can't do that. And decks that don't rely on powers and abilities, if you're looking at like a Mewtwo EX deck, or your Gorbis variants that use a lot of other Stage 1 Pokemon like Medicham, then you can encounter a bit of struggle there. As always, let me know what you think of the build, let me know how you would run it, what cards you would specifically slot into a Sceptile deck. Any partners besides Muk EX that you would like to stick with this guy? Let's get the discussion started. Thank you so much for watching another one of my videos, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.